Thank you for the opportunity, and my prayers are with the people who are impacted with floods. What board wants? Keeping business operations safe from cyber attack. Well, there should be a little doubt about the importance of cybersecurity these days, given the amount of attention the topic has gathered. The attack surface is growing as a result of increasing number of connected devices, malicious apps, Internet of Things, ever-growing cloud services, and digitization of business functions. If that was not sufficient, thanks to COVID, board members are under pressure from all sides of the deck to keep data and business operations safe from cybersecurity or cyber attack. Though boards are concerned about cyber risks, they were not always part of it. They were not always engaged as much they should have been. We have noticed that at around 30% is the uptake when it comes to these topics. The reason being, it sounds important, but the detail is very, very difficult to understand. It's full of jargon, DDoSes, phishing, DR, you name it. It's full of jargon and technical geeks. And it's not one magic pill, it multiples, perimeters, firewalls, again, ethical hackers, end user devices. It makes a very, very complex lay of the land. Therefore, it's very important for any CIOs like me or IT managers, CISOs, or for that matter, anyone who wants to take this mandate to board to lay out the landscape in a way that's easily accessible and understandable, and most importantly, what actionable information or insight that you're seeking for, and making those very important decisions when it comes to handling the cyber risks. I call it selling it like a soap. Before I move on, I'm Manohar, CIO at City of Fort Phillip, a progressive council in state of Victoria, Melbourne. I'm a startup founder. I'm a technology mentor and investor. I have played lead roles with big firms like Robert Bosch, for instance, in Germany, and NTT Data in Australia. I'm also an honorary fellow with Deakin University's Applied Artificial Intelligence Institute. Let's try to understand a bit about the world and what's actually happening in our part of the world. World population by 2050 is going to be 100 billion. And Africa would be double in its numbers as it is today. What does that mean? You will further have aged society, and the age case will become a premium and expensive. Healthcare, we're already seeing how stressful it is. 2 weeks of influx of patients, the ICUs go for a toss. And it's expensive and not ready to scale up at the quantum that it wants. So is resources. Upset of pandemic, even toilet papers become such an expensive thing to procure and not even available. Forget about the natural resources. That's the state of resources that we have. How do we feed a 50 billion, by 2050, a 10 billion population? Global policies, they're changing by an individual who will lead the country versus protecting their patch of the world. And it's very dramatic. We have noticed in immigrations, we have noticed in trade wars, the global policies are changing, very, very protective in nature. And this so-called globalization, to a certain extent, or a large extent, is eroding. Climate change, I shouldn't be talking about it. You are witnessing in your part of the world what's happening and across the globe as well. A lot of it is really, really a ticking bomb that we're experiencing. Tail in pool, it's a dichotomy that we have a lot of people who are looking for jobs. At the same time, there are a lot of jobs which are looking for this talented person who come and occupy that position. It's really unfortunate that we can't put talent to the right skill to a right job. Pollution, plastics are in ocean already. The seafood, probably what you're eating, is has been fed with the plastic, and there's every bit of a chance that the lymphatic system can have a polypropylene in future or near future. It sounds fast, furious, and scary, the world around us. Let's have a look into what's happening on the technology side of things. Internet, the biggest source of everything. It is still one of our biggest fears for any CSOs who is exposed to internet in under what circumstances. And these days, availability of bandwidth and internet is the biggest thing. And I'm not even talking about IoTs and smart cities. The backbone is fundamental internet and data. Artificial intelligence, there's so much has been spoken about it. I believe the best people who are actually putting to use as those hackers who are actually capturing every log of the information and learning new ways to actually penetrate into your systems. So putting artificial intelligence to the right use is just to take off. It's peaking, but it's really need to be on the ground level for consumption. HMI, human machine interfaces. You could look at the AR in the gaming world, the amount of gaming that is happening and the people are interacting with the machines is unbelievable. AR has really taken off in the gaming world, but I strongly believe it will be a commercial modeling as well, where you could see it, meetings like this virtually would happen as if I'm actually in front of you talking. And trust me, it's so inconvenient not to watch a person in a seminar or a webinar like this to talk about the subject with other people without having to have those emotions and visuality of it. But who knows, in the next event like this, we might have a AR enabled environment that we are watching each other and having to capture those questions and emotions right there. Quantum computing, I think it's the next big thing to watch out for. In the next 2 or 3 years, the computing will really move towards the quantum computing era. And what does that mean from the cybersecurity point of view? You could have a prolonged DDoS attack for 1 Tbps. That's the amount of computing space that's getting available these days. Is tech just sufficient where we are? But we are seeing tech also in biotech. There could be a pacemaker, there could be a vaccination, which could have an electrode or an IoT device, which is actually embedded in your body. And what does that mean? That somebody can hack your system, which is integrated well into your body. The human DNA and the human genesis is actually could be changed or modified if it goes into that level of technology that is getting consumed, which is good on the one side, but other side, it could fall into wrong hands, and anything can happen when it comes to spread of viruses or spread of non-immunity. It's a real true hacking of an individual, of a human species. Energy tech, there are many instances where some of the energy techs have been attacked, and particularly the battery tech, what we are talking. It's good to have, but it's so susceptible for anything like this under the cyber security kind of a scenarios. Space tech, uh, it's no longer NASA's and the ISROs of the world that are working on the space tech. The startups are now working on space tech. That means consumerization of space technology is a lot more granular and easier. Would that also mean that we're actually opening the floodgates for people to enter back door into space tech? Could there be a space station that could be hijacked? And could there be a ransomware attack at a space station? What does that mean to all of our GPSs and other things that are actually controlling and monitoring all our traffic and networks? Manufacturing, with manufacturing shifting back to homes as a trend, what we are noticing. There'll be a lot of adaptive manufacturing. Suppliers across the world will be very, very digitally connected if they're not already connected, not at a transaction level of sending purchase orders and invoices or contracts, but really at a product level. A finished product or a semi-finished product can be dictated from another plant to a supplier, for instance. So what happens when you have a connected IoT industry, as we call, or industry 4, as we call it, and adaptive manufacturing? So that's the kind of change that we are seeing both on the social side, which I showed before, and the technology side, which I show now. With this, what's our role? I always say, think devil evil to do good. So be proactive. And what does that mean, being proactive? I'll just run through some of those scenarios. How do you explain a scenario to your board? Quite popular these days. You might have seen this. This is from Jacob Morgan in 2014 when he released this book called The Evolution of an Employee. So truthful. People can work from anywhere. People can work anytime. We are only focused on the outputs. People can use any device and shares information. The same device probably is being used by the son and the father, and son have a different purpose altogether, and the father has a different purpose altogether. Um, it's not, it's a shared device, maybe in some cases. So it's completely getting democratized. For us, the office has left the building. What does that mean for you? How do you want to paint this picture back? So how can you be proactive in this scenario? What do you mean by use of any device? Not just the security point of view, but also think about the user experience people would use. Some of those devices might not be able to provision some of your applications. You might want to start thinking about VPN versus Citrix versus direct access versus IPv4 with IPv6 application kind of nature. So a lot of backend infrastructure conversations and designs would need to happen. Cybersecurity is not just a tool and a device for us, but it's also the design of your backend infrastructure and how you're actually provisioning this back uh, to the consumer, in this case, your employee. Yeah, very interestingly, at least scenario, I believe, which is the same for many of you, is that we have 5 different generations of workflows working with us. Call it Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y. I have not quoted the age groups that, but you know what I'm talking here is there's a very different appetite and learning abilities for across your own employees and workforce, because all of them are from different generations and many of them are still working. So I call it 5 different generations working together in many cases. And guess what? We are also having RPAs these days as robotic process automation. And there are robots which are not physical robots, which are software robots, which are also working just like your employee. And just to give a beautiful narrative in this slide, this is a digital employee, the first digital employee a particular bank has hired. Now, this is Mia. Her name is Mia. It's a U bank which has hired the first digital employee, which could be in the front office without being a human being. A digital employee is actually wishing them, talking to all the plans the bank has. I've seen in one of those automotive sectors where it was all the queries were asked with a digital person here. And the good thing is it could even detect whether it's a child who is interacting. It could be a male or a female. What it could even remember and process. It could talk in 20 different languages, probably no issues with the dialect, and no complaints about fatigue, not taking a coffee break. Why would somebody not have a digital employee like this, particularly when you can't have a person in front 24/7 for various reasons? But what does this mean? You could train a human being, you could train an individual to talk about phishing attacks, but how would a digital employee like this would react to a phishing attack? Maybe better, maybe not better. But is this the future? Is this reality? Yes. How are you proactive about this? This is what the board wants to hear. They would not know your DDoS attack, but if you narrate a story, if you narrate the changing scenarios, if you tie it back to your DDoS attack, if you tie it back why it's important to have a DR, why it's important to have a data protection strategy, why it's important to have a business continuity plan, narrating these stories, it's a lot easy to interact with the board, and most importantly, you'll be able to sell your vision where you could actually engage with the board to further process that information back to you by the likes of asking more budget, by the likes of asking an SIEM platform, by the likes of putting in your SEO for that matter, SOC for that matter. Right, let me fast track. Learn from experience. What does this mean? Whenever a black swan event happens, or whenever there's a major shakeup that happens, call it recession, call it downturn, there's always something that's relevant comes into the world. Go back and look into that. Some of the examples that I could look at, um, of course, I don't really do it, but I've seen business cases where you could actually hire a hairstylist. The world's best hairstylist is actually giving their advice. I wouldn't go to a barber in those days when there were lockdowns, but this might be an extreme case, but the business models is that self-consumption. Look what in dot-com era, we have seen Apples and Googles and Amazons probably taking off in 2008, 2009, when we had the subprime crisis. We started to look at Airbnb and Ubers of the world coming up. There are always new business models that are evolving out of constraints. As I said, this might be an extreme case, but and this is reality. This is happening around. When your business model changes, what does that mean from your system infrastructure? What does that mean the way you're consuming information? So this is very important to keep an eye on what is happening at a business model level. What are my new revenue sources? What am I compromising to get into a new revenue model? From a B2B business, am I moving to B2C, or am I moving to a platform-based consumption? Am I putting all my produce and information onto a third-party platform? What does that mean? Am I actually providing more APIs to actually have that API economy interaction? So some of these things will come out when you start challenging the business models where the companies are investing these days. This is 2014, if I'm not wrong. Eric Topol, when the smartphones really starting to take off, the new versions of Apples and others starting to have a field play. He wrote about who's actually vulnerable today. Is it doctor? Probably the frontline workers are probably more vulnerable. Do they have to come and touch and see your vitals, or can you actually use a smartphone to actually record all your vitals? Your Fitbits of the world probably are telling more than what the doctor wants. And do you really need to go and see the doctor unless it's an emergency? Or why do you have to physically go and see a doctor? But what does that mean for you in terms of your data privacy? What does that mean in terms of how the data is a sensitive information like this is moving on and on internet? How do you predict this? This is 2014, but for me, it's already reality, where some of my colleagues said that how seamlessly, without even seeing a medical professional in physical nature, they are able to get the medicines disposed to their home, and their care has been provided fantastically by getting some of the vitals on the time. And their proactive monitoring, sometimes with some of those amnesia patients and others, I'm told they even proactively monitor. There are people who monitor their heartbeat, and a slip of a heartbeat continuously indicates there's something wrong with this particular person, and they in fact send an ambulance in advance, keeping in mind something might happen. That's the amount of intrusion that's happening into that. There's a convenience, be very important to have that. I do trust and advocate this technology, but what does that mean for somebody in the board in terms of data, in terms of privacy? Again, this is something that we need to really understand, and this is the way you take forward your mandate. Education, very true. I'm sure most of you would have experienced this already. Kids, they love to go to school now that in Australia the schools have opened, but look at the convenience. There's a fair bit of education that was carried remotely as well, and I'm sure there are some kids who are wanting to ask, why do you have to go to school? Is it really to learn, or is it really to have social skills? I would ask that at some point in time. Why do you have to go to school 5 days a week? Is there something, are they going to only interact and build those social skills? What does that mean for homeschooling? And why school is the biggest thing that's coming up. But at the same time, there's technology providers. At the same time, there's privacy providers. And there were a lot of challenges when we had the initial days of Zoom bombing and all that stuff. And it's very sensitive because you're dealing with kids here, and the kind of information that needs to be shared across, and what information is actually coming back online when it comes to this. So are the cameras in rooms now? Is it an intrusion already? Is it only by intention? Who makes the choice? Uh, what kind of governance do we have here? Again, a phenomena that should be seen. Experience is telling us from the past events that these are real. And how are you geared up to this? And how do you actually narrate it back to the board? All right, if I move, yeah, and one of the other things that uh, we have noticed is there's a bit of advancement when the payment models happen. We do have credit cards, then nobody is actually carrying a paper money unless otherwise somebody really insists on that. Um, there are people who actually do the NFCs and payments, but the trend what we are seeing is the chips probably that are getting embedded. It's not even a wear. In this case, you see a person is wearing something, but the same person also has a chip embedded, which is your payment chip, and it's able to make those payments conveniently. And who knows, that could be your bio chip going forward, would be your digital passport, is it? Some of these large questions that we are seeing, and it's accelerating at a very fast trend. And which every of such wave of transformation, credit cards are moved to contactless cards. You just wave it. Now, mobiles, for instance, app-based payments. Currency is now becoming cryptos. It's not taken off, but one day it probably will take off. But it's not very far that you have one chip in your body, which is you, which is your identity, which is your true digital twin of a human being, your second life probably. So are we good? You might think this is all fictitious. It might take some time. Good to have. That's not true. The acceleration is very fast. But some of the technologies that are getting implemented now could fast track your thinking. But can we narrate this as a story? Can we fast track the board's thinking and vision into this process? That's what I'm alluding to here. What is truly real that's happening in our patch of the world is that we strongly believe the manufacturing will return to the homes. We're seeing this, and cost of labor, cost of production would still be very high, um, um, irrespective of what happens. So companies are investing in technology now, and just like paperless offices, which is real. I'll be very surprised if you're still signing on a paper if it's not anything else, unless otherwise it's real legal contacts. Even there, it's getting accepted. Uh, Lights off factories is what the conversation that we are having sometimes in our vicinity and in my interactions with the customers as well. Um, and it's really a spread of complete wireless, seamless machine to machine communication, M2M, um, and everything has to be an IoT based, sensor based kind of interactions. It's not just within, but also with the external elements of it. So your whole factory is based on your security model, if you want to think about that, and that will determine whether you're able to release the produce on that particular day or not. All right, this is more or less the last segment of it. What does this mean? How can I look a holistic adaptive security? How can we predict? How do we detect? What do we neutralize? Keep it simple, keep it easy jargon, um, make make the storyboarding nice here, make policy and framing better, narrate using as plain English as possible. Don't get into jargons and don't get into zero-day threat attacks. Very difficult for somebody to understand. Ransomware is not all about your money. It has a lot to do about your own ways and means of organizing your information, and most so importantly, your data, backups, and the hygiene factors behind it, right? Whilst the whole technology society is in transformation, security is also in transition. As I mentioned before, there's an increased cybersecurity risk from remote working and also learning in many cases, as we have seen. Interestingly, the average time to detect a cyber threat has increased in spite of all the tools and technologies. People take more time to really understand, oh, did this happen to us? it takes 2 or 3 months. Sometimes in worst case scenarios, that a ransomware attack might be a symptom, but the actual problem was happening from the last 3 months in many cases in the recent ransomware attacks. So somebody is actually chipping your network and organization's information slowly, and one day they decide to actually come up with a red screen asking you to make those payments. Your physical security is exposed. Your perimeter has moved outside your office boundaries. So what firewalls, what are we talking about? What physical firewalls and what physical cyber security information that we are looking like? uh, the more and more cyber criminals these days. I don't know if they have more time as well, but there's a whole lot of influx of cyber criminals from various world. Some are even worst case scenarios. Some are even sponsored by states. That has really been the state of the situation today. And look, we didn't have a BCP that was customized for a pandemic like this. Uh, but it's no less than any cyber attack. If you look at how relevant is the BCP is, that how do you plan for this business continuity plan? Something that board likes is business continuity plans, and it's very, very important to stretch your imagination. I said, think evil to do good. Look into your business continuity plans with that mind share, and really important to look into your use unfortunately, but use COVID as your catalyst to look into your cybersecurity posture, what it is today. Yeah, good that you have facilitated what needs to be done, but it's also important to look what needs to be done from here. Uh, Most of you who are in this space would understand this. This is nothing new. But most important thing that you need to take up is on the policies and the procedures, and where are the vulnerabilities, where is the prevention plan. If it is an operation center, if it's a truck that is actually doing something outside your premises, and if that truck is connected, if that particular mobile device is connected, and who uses it, what kind of policies are around that, and what kind of roles and access privileges you want to control. You should really have a very strong control mechanism, and this is a top-down driven. This is where you need to imply what does not having a policy mean, what does a user and access privilege mean, and how does that impact your access control, and how do you enforce those strong passwords. Not having to do a phishing training. What is my policy? If somebody constantly been reminded on a phishing training and not doing that, or even failed, what is your policy around that? These are some of the important discussions that needs to be spoken about. I have listed very generically here, but it's very important to map each one up with the story that I spoke before, and map and say this is where it comes and impacts our security posture. So I always do this. I look at this. This is my slide for myself. And if I have to talk about not having a VPN or to have a different kind of a VPN, I would go back and remind either a business model, either the changing cultural nature of it, either something is changing in terms of technology. That's where I go and narrate the story behind my need of asking what we need to do. The last one, pretty much people are your main critical subject of focus. We always call it as a human firewall. If there's a good human firewall, you probably don't, you're the most relaxed IT manager, if I might say. Challenge your processes. Why this? Sometimes people would tend to make deviations in the project processes because we have been doing business like this. It only works for us. I don't care about best practices, but this is how we do business. And they might end up putting some of the information or a sensitive information on a web or in a non-protected environment, or not having a backup for that process, or buying a system by swiping a credit card, for instance, because business wanted to go live yesterday, right? So very, very important to challenge the processes. And most importantly, have a look into your technology, a relook, always see what has changed. If it is on-prem, what has changed from me? What perimeter access that I'm looking at? It is evolving. It's not easy, but it's always important to have that view of what's happening in the space of technology as well, particularly in the cybersecurity space. The other three in parallel that I think is very, very important is, can we have artificial intelligence embedded in every entry point and exit point of your systems landscape? what does that mean? I spoke about threat detection, remediation, sort of a things. Could we start using the power of AI in some of those processes? More and more we are seeing automation. So don't imagine if I set up a process, this would be work like this. There's a lot of automation happening. So you need to see whether what the applied controls and the governance on the cyberspace, whether that's also applicable for automation. And that comes from your RPAs like scenarios, the digital robots, and they're there and they'll work with you and they'll coexist. So it's a chain of things. It's no longer people process technology, the other things that are surfacing. Um, I hope I made sense with some of my thoughts. I shared my experience of how I would sell it like a soap to my board and make them see the value and take the buy-in. Whilst the broader need, every board would want their data to be safe. Every board would want to be not to be in the media and attention, not to have the bad rep. Obviously, it's about how you actually narrate the point. Thank you. And listening to me in patience, even if it is remote. I will stop here and take if there are any calls and questions.